Picture this. A black man quietly takes his first-class seat on a flight, only to be told by a flight attendant that he belongs in economy. But here's the twist. He's not just a passenger. He's the pilot scheduled to take over for the next leg of the journey. What happens next leaves every passenger stunned, as the captain's powerful response to this unexpected prejudice turns a routine flight into an unforgettable lesson on dignity and respect. Stay tuned to hear how one pilot's quiet strength shook an entire plane, and let us know where you're listening from. Captain Elijah Carter, a 42-year-old seasoned airline pilot, sank into the plush leather of a first-class seat on a flight from Atlanta to San Francisco. Today, for once, he was just another passenger. Dressed in casual jeans and a polo shirt, he blended into the line of travelers boarding the flight. He pulled out his worn copy of The Spirit of St. Louis, a book he loved since childhood, and prepared to enjoy the rare luxury of first class. But before he could fully settle, Elijah felt a presence by his side. A blonde flight attendant, Holly, with a polished yet faintly distracted smile, leaned over him. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely but with an edge. "May I see your boarding pass?" Elijah blinked in surprise, handing her the ticket. Holly scrutinized it, then glanced at Elijah, her expression shifting from confusion to something harder to read. "I'm afraid there may have been a mix-up," she said with a forced smile. "This seat is for our first-class passengers. I'll need you to move to economy." Stunned, Elijah swallowed his frustration. This wasn't his first encounter with this kind of discrimination, but it felt especially glaring here, in a place where he should have felt at ease. Taking a breath, he kept his tone calm. "I'm certain this is my seat, ma'am," he replied. "Please double-check if you need to." But Holly's smile tightened, and she gestured insistently for him to move. Around him, curious glances and muttered whispers from other first-class passengers echoed through the cabin. Reluctantly, Elijah stood. "I'd like to speak with the captain before we take off," he said. Holly's mouth twisted, but she nodded curtly as if dismissing him. With one last look around, Elijah walked down the aisle, a silent resolve building within him. Elijah took his new seat in the cramped economy section, the harshness of the injustice settling uncomfortably over him. Despite the professionalism he'd cultivated over decades in the airline industry, memories from his early career surfaced, the countless times he'd had to prove himself simply because of his skin color. He tried to read, but a prickling tension filled the cabin. Passengers around him exchanged glances, some curious, some openly sympathetic. Just as he attempted to lose himself in his book, he saw Holly again, moving down the aisle in hurried conversation with another flight attendant. She noticed him and quickly averted her eyes. Elijah sighed, wondering if this flight might serve as an opportunity to educate rather than resent. But how could he do so effectively without escalating the situation? As he was deep in thought, a voice came from the intercom. "Elijah Carter, please make your way to the front of the plane. We apologize for any inconvenience." The murmurs grew as Elijah made his way forward, now feeling a strange mix of trepidation and vindication. As Elijah made his way up the narrow aisle, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes following him. Some passengers looked away uncomfortably, while others tracked him openly, their expressions a blend of curiosity and confusion. He could sense the unease in the air, a potent mix of discomfort and intrigue that rippled through the cabin like an electric current. At the front of the plane, First Officer David Morales awaited him, an unmistakable look of dawning horror on his face. Morales had known Elijah for years. They had crossed paths in airports, exchanged stories over late-night layovers, and shared mutual respect for each other's flying skills. Now he stood frozen, as though grappling with an internal storm of guilt and disbelief. "Elijah, Captain Carter," David stammered, his voice dropping to a hushed, almost reverential tone. It wasn't just a question, it was a formal recognition, a shift from friend to professional, from casual acquaintance to deferential acknowledgement. Beside David stood Holly, the flight attendant whose casual dismissal had sparked this moment. The dawning realization flooded her face, and her once bright smile faded, replaced by something else entirely, embarrassment mingled with shock. She looked from David to Elijah, her cheeks flushed a deep crimson as if the weight of the passenger's stares had transferred to her. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," David managed, his gaze darting between Elijah and Holly, as though trying to piece together how such an error could have happened under his watch. His shoulders sagged, and he looked at Elijah with an expression of raw apology. Elijah held his ground, his gaze steady and unyielding. He wasn't interested in a spectacle or seeking retribution. He simply wanted to reclaim the dignity and respect he had rightfully earned. "I'd be glad to take my assigned seat, thank you," he said calmly, his voice even, though inside he felt the adrenaline pulse through him. Holly took a step back, visibly shaken. Her eyes widened as she absorbed the weight of her mistake, and she opened her mouth as if to apologize, but the words caught in her throat. Her face had paled, her hands clenched tightly around her clipboard, the corners of her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Elijah held her gaze a moment longer, not out of malice, but to allow her to fully understand the impact of her actions. The discomfort radiated off her in waves, her professional veneer cracking. She was young, likely new to the airline, and it showed. Her confidence had evaporated, replaced by a vulnerable unease as she realized that her assumptions had led her to make a critical mistake. It was a stark reminder of how quickly judgment could cloud reason, and how assumptions could cast even the most competent person into a shameful light. David, visibly pained, cleared his throat and turned to Elijah with a sense of reverence. "Captain Carter, would you come with me to the cockpit? It's only right that you take command for the second leg, as planned." Elijah gave a slight nod, acknowledging David's words without fully allowing himself to relax. The incident was far from over, but he sensed that for the first time the people around him were beginning to truly see him, not just as a face, but as a figure of authority, competence, and respect. He adjusted his posture, and as he moved toward the cockpit, a profound stillness settled over the first-class cabin. The hushed whispers had quieted, and the passengers watched him with wide eyes and unreadable expressions. He could feel their stares prickling against his back, their silence as loud as a shout. To them, this wasn't just a passenger being corrected. It was a revelation, an unveiling that cast Elijah in a new, powerful light. As he passed Holly, he felt a slight pang of pity for her. She was young, likely no more than a few years into her career, and he could see that she was wrestling with a storm of shame. She had the potential to learn from this, if she chose to. For a split second, their eyes met again. She looked away quickly, clutching her clipboard as if it could shield her from the weight of her mistake. But Elijah offered her a small, nearly imperceptible nod, a silent gesture that, while he didn't condone her actions, he hoped she would take this as a moment of growth. As he approached the cockpit door, he straightened his shoulders, feeling a renewed sense of purpose surge through him. In this role, in this space, he could change the narrative, not only for himself, but for every person of color who had been made to feel like an outsider, an intruder in places where they rightfully belonged. The cockpit opened with a gentle click, and David gestured for Elijah to enter first. The pilot and CO pilot, both seasoned flyers themselves, turned, their eyes widening in surprise. They'd heard the exchange on the headset and knew Elijah was joining them as a relief pilot. But seeing him now, they understood that his return to the cockpit carried more weight than anyone had anticipated. "Welcome aboard, Captain Carter," the pilot said, extending his hand with a formal respect that conveyed both his authority and his empathy. Elijah grasped the hand firmly, a silent but powerful acknowledgement passing between them. As he took his seat, he felt the familiar comfort of the controls beneath his fingertips. The cockpit was his domain, his sanctuary, and now a place where he could command respect and prove, once again, that excellence knew no bounds. Outside the cockpit, the murmurs resumed, but now they carried a different tone, one of awe, admiration, and a collective reevaluation of what they had witnessed. They were no longer just passengers on a flight from Atlanta to San Francisco. They were part of a shared moment of reflection and reckoning. Elijah could feel the weight of that moment settling in his chest. He knew that as they ascended into the sky, there would be more than just altitude lifting him. He was climbing above prejudice, rising above assumptions, and showing everyone, Holly, the passengers, even himself, that sometimes the greatest journeys are the ones that elevate hearts and minds. As the cockpit door closed and the plane prepared for takeoff, Elijah glanced out over the expanse of controls and smiled, a small but resolute expression of triumph. Today, he would do more than fly a plane. He would lead by example, showing everyone on board that dignity and respect were not things to be granted, but things to be claimed and upheld no matter the cost. After a brief pause in the cockpit, Elijah changed into his uniform, and returned to first class, now fully in command and prepared to address the passengers. He picked up the intercom handset, speaking in a clear, steady voice. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Captain Elijah Carter, and I'll be taking command of this flight. Before we depart, I feel it's important to address a situation that occurred during boarding." Passengers leaned in, their attention fixed. "Today, I was asked to move from my assigned seat based on assumptions made about my appearance. This is not about blame, but rather an invitation for all of us to consider the weight of our assumptions." Silence fell over the cabin. Elijah could see understanding dawning on the faces before him, a mixture of shame, empathy, and uncomfortable recognition. "I share this not to assign fault, but to remind us all that every person deserves respect and dignity," he continued. "When we judge, even subconsciously, we limit our own growth and the potential of those around us." The cabin held its breath. Then, one by one, passengers began clapping. The applause swelled, carrying with it a sense of admiration and respect that left Holly standing still, her eyes downcast. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, the mood in the cabin had shifted palpably. Gone was the initial hum of small talk and idle chatter, replaced by a quieter, more contemplative atmosphere. Passengers sat back in their seats, staring into the distance or exchanging glances with one another, each lost in thought. In the rows of first class, Elijah could sense it, the quiet reckoning in the air. Conversations that might have been about business deals or vacation plans had taken a different tone, now revolving around what they had just witnessed. People leaned toward one another, their voices low but intent, whispering about the captain's speech and the raw, uncomfortable truth it had brought to light. A young couple across the aisle shared a look of mutual reflection. The woman, a sharp-eyed lawyer in her 30s, reached for her partner's hand and whispered, "It makes you think, doesn't it? How often do we let ourselves judge someone without even realizing it?" Her partner nodded slowly, looking down. "More than we'd like to admit, probably. I mean, we all saw it happening. And we just at there." Further down the aisle, an elderly man with a cane stared out the window, his face a mixture of sadness and regret. He'd spent his whole life teaching his family about treating people with respect. Yet here he was, realizing he hadn't had the courage to speak up when it truly mattered. He leaned forward, jotting a few words on a napkin, then looked around, catching the attention of a passing flight attendant. "Could you make sure Captain Carter gets this?" he asked, his voice gruff. The flight attendant nodded, taking the napkin with a faint smile as she collected other notes and messages. Gradually, more passengers reached out for napkins, scraps of paper, or whatever they could find, scribbling down words of apology, encouragement, and reflection. Some left heartfelt messages, while others simply wrote, "I'm sorry." For some, the act of writing became a form of release, a way to acknowledge their own shortcomings and strive towards something better. In the galley, Holly stood with her back to the cabin, gripping the counter as if it could ground her. She had never expected the day to take this turn. What had started as a routine flight had transformed into a personal reckoning, and she could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her. Her mind kept replaying the moment she'd asked Captain Carter to move. She remembered the look in his eyes, calm but deeply disappointed, as he complied with her request. The memory left her feeling raw, as if her every assumption, every unexamined bias had been exposed for all to see. "Holly, you okay?" She turned to see her fellow flight attendant, Maria, standing beside her, watching her with gentle concern. Maria placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, giving it a comforting squeeze. "You know, Holly," Maria said softly, "the important thing now is learning from this." Captain Carter turned a tough situation into a lesson for all of us. He could have made this about anger, but he didn't. Holly swallowed, her eyes welling with tears she couldn't blink away. "I know, Maria. I feel like I've been so blind." Her voice cracked, and she dabbed at her eyes with the corner of her sleeve. "I never saw myself as the kind of person who judged someone based on appearances. But that's exactly what I did." Maria nodded, her gaze steady. "The truth is, we all carry biases, even if we don't realize it. The difference is in what we choose to do once we see them." She paused, her expression softening. "Captain Carter showed us that. Now it's up to us to make it right." Holly took a deep, shaky breath. She hadn't felt this exposed, this vulnerable in a long time. Her entire career, she had prided herself on her professionalism and her commitment to treating every passenger with respect. Yet, with one assumption, one split-second judgment, she had undermined everything she thought she stood for. "Thanks, Maria," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I want to do better. I'll find a way to make this right. I don't want to let this just fade away." Maria smiled, giving Holly's shoulder another comforting squeeze. "Good. That's the first step. And remember, it's not about making one grand gesture. It's about doing the work every day. Small choices, small actions, they're what make real change." Holly nodded, her resolve hardening. She would take steps to unlearn her biases, to educate herself, and to ensure that no one else would ever feel the way Captain Carter had been made to feel. She was determined to prove to herself and to others that people could grow from their mistakes. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Elijah could sense the effect his words had had on the crew and passengers. It wasn't just the small notes being brought to him. It was the way each message reflected an attempt at growth. They weren't all perfect, but they were trying. For Elijah, this was more than he had hoped for, a ripple effect that reached beyond this one flight. First Officer David Morales broke the silence in the cockpit, his voice hesitant but sincere. "Captain Carter, I wanted to say I'm sorry too. When I saw what was happening, I should have stepped in, but I didn't. I thought it was just a misunderstanding." Elijah glanced at David, studying his face. He knew that David hadn't intended any harm, but in not speaking up, he'd unintentionally played a part in the situation. Elijah's tone was calm but firm. David, being an ally means more than not being the problem. It means using your position to advocate even when it's uncomfortable. David nodded, visibly moved. "You're right, Elijah. I see that now. It won't happen again." He straightened, his expression resolute. "Thank you for setting an example for all of us." As the flight wore on, the notes kept coming. Elijah skimmed through them, feeling a mixture of sadness and hope. He read words of regret from the elderly man who hadn't spoken up, promises of self-reflection from the young couple, and heartfelt apologies from passengers who had simply observed in silence. Each note was a testament to the subtle but powerful transformation taking place in the cabin. Even Holly, still visibly shaken, had approached Elijah with trembling hands, offering a handwritten apology on a napkin. The words were simple but heartfelt. "Captain Carter, I deeply regret the assumptions I made about you. I see now how my actions hurt you and have learned a lesson I will carry with me. Thank you for your grace and for giving us all a chance to learn. I promise to do better." As he read her words, Elijah felt a small but profound sense of fulfillment. Holly's humility, her willingness to face her mistake, told him that change was possible. This journey, he realized, had the potential to reach far beyond this one flight. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Elijah received word that passengers had been writing messages of support. Even First Officer Morales, feeling regretful for not speaking up sooner, approached Elijah to express his admiration. "Captain Carter," he said, "your words, they've changed the atmosphere on this flight. I've never seen anything like it." Elijah smiled, his voice calm but resolute. "The real test is what happens after we land," he said. "Change happens in daily choices. It's what people do when no one's watching that counts." The plane touched down in San Francisco with an energy that felt different from any landing Elijah had experienced. As they taxied to the gate, passengers clapped again, their appreciation a testament to the lesson they had all shared. As the plane pulled up to the gate, the quiet anticipation in the cabin gave way to something altogether different, a feeling that they were about to disembark from more than just a flight. Passengers lingered in their seats, some glancing around, while others exchanged grateful nods and words with flight attendants who moved through the aisles, no longer just employees but fellow witnesses to a transformative journey. Elijah stood near the cockpit door as the seatbelt sign dinged off. It was a subtle sound, but it marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As passengers began to gather their belongings, murmurs of gratitude and admiration filled the air, and one by one they walked down the aisle toward him. At first, the applause was soft, just a few claps from those closest to him, but it spread quickly, gathering strength, until the sound echoed through the cabin and spilled out into the terminal. The passengers, those who had witnessed the day's events from start to finish, applauded not only for Elijah's skill as a captain, but for his courage, his composure, and his refusal to let prejudice define him. When Elijah finally stepped out onto the jet bridge, he was met by the sight of passengers gathered at the gate, clapping and cheering. Some of the airport staff, noticing the unusual energy, joined in, drawn to the gathering by a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Travelers passing by paused, craning their necks to see what could have inspired such an unexpected celebration. Elijah, ever composed, gave a modest nod, his face calm but his heart brimming with quiet pride. It wasn't the recognition he craved, it was the understanding, the realization that for many of these people, he had become a symbol of resilience, a reminder of the power that one person's dignity and grace could have. As the applause softened, Holly, the young flight attendant, approached him. Her face was a mix of hope and remorse, her eyes red from tears she'd shed privately after realizing the gravity of her mistake. She took a shaky breath, summoning her courage to speak. "Captain Carter," she began, her voice trembling with sincerity. "I know I apologized before, but I needed to say it again. Today changed something in me. I never imagined I'd be the type of person to make assumptions like that, but I did. And I'm committed to changing, to becoming better." Elijah regarded her, a gentle expression of compassion in his eyes. He understood the struggle, the rawness of seeing yourself clearly for the first time and recognizing the flaws you'd never noticed before. His tone was soft but firm. "Holly, the true apology is in action. Let your mistake be a starting point not just for you, but for others as well. Use it to help people understand the importance of respect, of seeing each other as human beings first." She nodded, swallowing back tears. "Thank you, Captain Carter. I won't forget this. I promise." At that moment, a young woman in a sleek business suit approached, her phone clutched in her hand, her face lit with a sense of excitement and purpose. She glanced around, gesturing toward the passengers who had started the movement, and held up her phone. "Captain Carter, I thought you should know, your story is already spreading. Soaring above biases trending on social media, people are sharing their own experiences, promising to challenge their biases, and committing to being better. This flight, your actions, they're inspiring people beyond this airport." Elijah raised his eyebrows in surprise, glancing around at the passengers who had begun typing on their phones, sharing their own accounts of the day. They were posting photos and messages, spreading the word that this was not just a story about a captain, but a story about change, about the power of one person's stand to inspire a movement. He looked back at the young woman and gave a modest nod. "I'm honored," he said, "but remember, this story isn't about me. It's about all of us learning to see each other as equals, as people with the same worth, no matter where we come from or how we look. That's the real takeaway." Passengers crowded around him, some with hands extended in gratitude, others with quiet words of thanks. An elderly man with a cane moved closer, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and regret. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice shaky with emotion. "I'm ashamed to admit I saw what happened, and I didn't speak up, but seeing how you handled it, it's taught this old man a new lesson. Thank you for your grace, for the strength you showed us today." A young mother holding her toddler stepped forward, her face etched with respect. "I'm grateful my son got to witness this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He's too young to understand it now, but I'll tell him about you one day, about how important it is to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it is." One by one, they spoke their gratitude, each sharing how Elijah's message had touched them, moved them to rethink their own judgments, and left them with a renewed sense of purpose. For them, this was more than a flight. It was an awakening, a reminder of the kind of world they wanted to live in, a world built on empathy, respect, and understanding. Nearby, First Officer David Morales watched the scene unfold, his face a mixture of pride and reflection. He approached Elijah when the crowd had thinned, extending a hand. "Captain Carter, I want you to know that I'm going to do better too. I let protocol get in the way of seeing what was really happening, and I should have spoken up. You've taught me that sometimes we have to go beyond our duties and use our voices, no matter how uncomfortable it might be." Elijah shook his hand firmly, his expression both kind and resolute. "That's all any of us can do, David. Every step toward understanding is a step in the right direction. The important thing is that we keep moving forward." As Elijah began to make his way through the terminal, he felt a gentle tap on his shoulder. Turning, he saw a small group of young aviation students who had gathered, their eyes wide with admiration and hope. Captain Carter, one of them, a young woman with curly hair and a hopeful smile, said, "We're all training to become pilots one day. Seeing you, hearing what happened today, it's given us so much strength. You've shown us that there's a place for all of us up there, no matter who we are." Elijah felt a surge of pride as he looked at the young students, each with their own dreams, their own journeys yet to come. "The skies are for everyone," he said warmly. "Remember that. And never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." The students beamed, nodding as they absorbed his words. One of them, a young black man, spoke up, his voice filled with conviction. "We'll do our part too, Captain Carter. We'll make sure people know that there's space for everyone in this industry." Elijah placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him an encouraging nod. "Good. Remember, the future of aviation and of the world is in your hands. Keep pushing forward and make it a place where everyone can soar." Weeks later, Elijah received a call from the airline's CEO, Margaret Lewis. She praised his handling of the situation and offered him a role in the company's diversity and inclusion initiatives. Elijah accepted, knowing this role would allow him to influence real change, far beyond the confines of a single flight. Elijah's journey had shown him that the skies held boundless potential for planes and for people willing to rise above prejudice. And every time he donned his uniform, he was reminded that he wasn't just flying planes, but paving the way for future generations to soar without limits. As he looked up at the sky that evening, Elijah smiled. Today, he had flown higher than ever before, with a spirit unbroken and a commitment to lead others toward a brighter, more inclusive future. As Captain Elijah Carter walked away from the plane, his powerful response had left every passenger changed. He turned a moment of prejudice into a lesson on courage and respect. Now, what would you have done? If you'd been on that flight, would you have spoken up or watched in silence? And if you were in Elijah's shoes, how would you have handled it? Think about it, and let us know your thoughts on Captain Carter's story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives.